CrowdStrike leaves thousands of travelers stranded. Some actually good news, and Kamala Harris locks up the Democratic nomination, which is right up her alley. Then more on this week's America Uncovered headlines. Welcome to America Uncovered, I'm Chris Chappell. The news has been a little too hectic the past few weeks, so let's start off with some light, relaxing news about space exploration. NASA's Curiosity rover made what's been described as a mind-blowing discovery on Mars. Yellowish-green crystals made of pure sulfur. This has never been seen on Mars before. Great! Even things in space are unprecedented right now. Scientists will look into what these pure sulfur crystals can tell us about the red planet, and New Age spiritualists will look into what pure sulfur crystal healing can do, besides make your chakras smell really, really gross. Even the news in the animal kingdom is wild. Well, wilder. Sharks off the coast of Brazil have tested positive for cocaine. Man, the marketing for the sequel to Cocaine Bear is starting up super early. Scientists have suggested that drugs dumped into waters by smugglers could impact marine life. The fact that all 13 sharks tested positive for cocaine seems to prove this, with some showing a concentration 100 times greater than other underwater creatures. This is obviously sad for the sharks, mainly because with their tiny little fins they can't reach their mouths to rub their gums. But hey, on the bright side, this story is a win for Florida, because it involves animals and something depressing, and has nothing to do with them. Way to keep your crazy out of the news this week, Sunshine State. The sheriff of Walton County, Florida, is urging citizens to stop taking selfies with the depressed-looking black bear on the side of the road. This is what I get for assuming Florida wasn't going to Florida. Hey, look, a dangerous wild animal that appears to have nothing to live for. Let's go get within swiping range and turn our back to it. No word on why this bear is so sad. If I had to guess, I'd say it's because he's also been keeping track of the news. It's not that California once again hasn't listened to his message that only they can prevent forest fires. Hopefully this depression doesn't drive him to relapse on his cocaine habit. Hey, how about some good news? A generic version of an HIV drug already on the market could be made and cost only $40 a year for each patient. Researchers say this is the closest we have ever been to an HIV vaccine. The second closest we've been to an HIV vaccine is letting Magic Johnson sneeze on you and hoping you get some kind of magic antibodies. The drug, lenacapavir, sold under the name Sunlenca, currently costs $420,000 for the first year. I assume they say the first year because after spending that much money on life-saving medicine, you look at your bank account in year 2 and start to think maybe life is overrated. So this generic version could cost 1,000 times less. That's great. Of course, the key word there is could. This is the pharmaceutical industry we're talking about, after all. There are calls for Sunlenca's manufacturer, Gilead, to allow generic licensing through a UN program that would help distribute the astronomically cheaper version of the drug to lower and middle income countries. That could happen. They could help make this drug affordable, but I'm not going to get my hopes up just yet because pharmaceutical companies could also have not helped exacerbate the opioid epidemic. But who could blame them? After all, if they didn't, how could they make obscene amounts of profit? Speaking of issues with huge faceless companies, last Friday, cybersecurity company CrowdStrike put out a faulty security update that caused Microsoft Windows to crash around the world. CrowdStrike apologized for the disruption this caused across several industries and said a significant number of the devices have been fixed. Delta Airlines was especially affected. They canceled hundreds of flights a day for several days in a row. Days after the initial outage, 1/3 of Delta's flights were still canceled or delayed, which, as someone who's flown on Delta many times, I assume is just slightly worse than their average. Customers have been forced to wait in long lines like this one, with Delta making many wait multiple days before rebooking their flights and not offering hotel or meal vouchers, because the airline industry's motto seems to be striving to make the pharmaceutical industry look great by comparison. While this outage affected most airlines, Delta is still scrambling to catch up. The U.S. Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection launched an investigation into Delta because they canceled far more flights and are dealing with these issues longer than any other airline. Makes sense the government would want to look into this. After all, taking people's money and giving them horribly disappointing results. If they even give them anything at all, that's their job. And after the break, Biden's grants to cut pollution. Welcome back. The Biden administration announced $4.3 billion in community grants for projects to combat climate pollution in 30 states. They're hoping these projects will create jobs and help cut greenhouse gases and other harmful pollution across the country. While I hope for the best, I have previously covered how clean energy can be disastrous and even dirty. If you want an immediate, cheap way to cut noxious fumes being released into our atmosphere, ban Jack in the Box's 2 tacos for $1 meal. Those things produce more gas than Chevron. I thought taco shells were supposed to be hard or soft, not so greasy they sweat through the wrapper. Speaking of President Biden and expenses, Donald Trump asked if he's entitled to a refund on funds he spent campaigning against Biden. As he explains in a Truth Social post, shouldn't the Republican Party be reimbursed for fraud in that everybody around Joe, including his doctors and the fake news media, knew he was not capable of running for or being president? Just asking. So he's asking for his money back because the person he thought he was paired with wasn't what he portrayed himself as. This feels less like a presidential race and more like someone angry at an online date because they didn't look like their pictures in the profile. Imagine expecting this, but getting this instead. That's what America's going through right now. After stepping down from the race on X and then disappearing for days, Biden has a lot of explaining to do. And he made an attempt to do just that when he gave his first address to the nation since dropping out of the presidential race.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. It's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. There's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now.
Yes, there's a time and a place to pass the torch. And that time and place is apparently when the DNC and George Clooney pry it from your white-knuckled, unwilling hands. What a brave decision, Joe. But with Biden out, who will the new nominee be? Well, according to the Associated Press, Kamala Harris is now backed by enough delegates to become the Democratic presidential nominee. And I'm sure a woman of color being anointed the presidential nominee pisses off a lot of racist white folks, such as Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter posted on their official X account that this isn't how the nomination process should go since we do not live in a dictatorship. Delegates are not oligarchs. Installing Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee and an unknown vice president without any public voting process would make the modern Democratic Party a party of hypocrites. What? This would make the Democratic Party hypocrites? The Democrats have already been hypocrites. A little late for that. And sure, Democrats could hold an election to choose their nominee, but why bother? I mean, it's not like there's some kind of Democratic Party or anything. So it looks like the new matchup in November will be Harris versus Trump. And the left and right online spheres have kicked into high gear with rallying items such as this oil painting of Jesus in front of an American flag with a bandage over his ear, and this musical TikTok of Harris's viral coconut tree line.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you lived and what came before you.
I never thought I'd say this, but I miss when propaganda was just nefarious and not nefarious and this stupid. But how do the candidates stack up against one another? According to a recent Reuters Ipsos poll, Harris is leading by 2%, which isn't a lot, but a far better cry than in 2020 when, and I stress this is 100% true, Trump received more write-in votes during the 2020 Democratic presidential primaries than Kamala Harris did. This is like competing in a baseball game and you get beaten by someone who wasn't even the game, and also a hockey player. Meanwhile, it seems like left-leaning media are in on helping Harris, with Axios claiming that Republicans are incorrect in calling her the border czar, since she, according to them, never held that title, even though Axios itself referred to her as the border czar. And not just Axios.
Quote-unquote border czar. Vice President, Harris was not a border czar.
Meantime, Vice President and border czar Kamala Harris facing some backlash.
What he said about Harris and immigration was not true. She was never appointed border czar.
And this will be her first visit to the U.S.-Mexico border region since she was appointed as the border czar by President Biden.
People are going to have to counter the misinformation. You already hear folks talking about the border czar. She wasn't the border czar.
President Biden tapped Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, to be the border czar.
Now, she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her.
They were very critical of Kamala Harris, especially in her role as border czar.
You know, we're never going to be able to go green and switch to electric power if media outlets insist on using gaslighting. The candidates have already given a sneak preview of what their foreign policy might look like, with Harris joining over 30 lawmakers in not attending Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress. Pakistan would appreciate that, as they've officially designated Netanyahu a terrorist, although as ex-user Wojak Codes points out, that might be Pakistan's highest civilian title. Pro-Palestinian protesters descended on Washington waving Hamas flags and defacing monuments with pro-Hamas graffiti. This wasn't very widely reported in left-leaning media sites, likely because these were mostly peaceful calls for genocide. Meanwhile, Trump met with Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago on Friday. I'm sure they bonded over constantly being compared to Hitler. But who cares about policy? All anyone wants to know is, what's Harris's strategy to defeat Trump? And the answer is, contrasting her record as a prosecutor with Trump's as a felon. But don't worry, I'm sure Democrats who clutched their pearls and fear-mongered in 2016 that if Trump was elected, he would try to lock up political rivals, wouldn't advocate for the exact same thing, right?
I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
Oh no, does this mean as a follow-up to the all the ways Biden is like Trump video we made, we're gonna need to make a video on all the ways Harris is like Trump? I'd hate to add another cursed image to the internet and give people more mental scarring. Meanwhile, what's Trump's strategy for taking on Harris? Nicknaming her Lion Kamala Harris. Simple, evocative, catchy. Like Shakespeare said, brevity is the soul of wit. I assume Trump is a big Shakespeare fan since he also has all the best words. All I know is that no matter who wins the election, America is in need of some healing. And hopefully it'll be more effective and less smelly than pure sulfur crystal healing. And in my ongoing attempt to hide controversial topics YouTube doesn't like in gaming content, check out this video about useful idiots and communism in the Avatar game. They may be blue, but they're actually dirty reds. And America Uncovered wouldn't exist without your support. Click that orange button to support us on Patreon. All it takes is $1 an episode, and you can set a monthly limit. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.